A 7-year-old girl stood alone on a dangerous highway, holding a cardboard sign that read, "Help." 23 cars drove past without stopping. Then came the roar of a motorcycle, and everything changed. But what Derek discovered on that dirt road would haunt him forever. If this story touches your heart, please leave a like and share in the comments a moment when a stranger helped you. Your engagement helps us bring more inspiring stories to your screen. The autumn wind carried the smell of burning leaves through the empty highway of rural Tennessee. Derek Callahan gripped the handlebars of his Harley-Davidson, feeling the familiar vibration that had been his only companion for the past 3 years. At 52 years old, he had seen enough of life to know that peace was something other people found, not him. Never him. The Hells Angels Motorcycle Club had been his family since he returned from Afghanistan in 2009. The nightmares came with him, along with a piece of shrapnel too close to his spine to remove safely. His wife left in 2019, taking their son to California. She said she could not compete with his demons anymore. Derek did not blame her. He could not compete with them either. Maplewood was a small town that never welcomed the Hell Angels. The locals crossed the street when they saw the leather jackets. Store owners watched them with suspicious eyes. Parents pulled their children closer. Derek understood their fear, even if it was misplaced. Appearances were powerful things, and his appearance told a story of danger that his heart did not match. That October afternoon, Derek was returning from visiting his mother's grave in Nashville. She had passed 8 months ago, and he still talked to her headstone every Sunday. It was the only conversation where he felt no judgment. The highway stretched empty before him, the trees painting the hills in orange and red. Then he saw something that made his heart stop. A child. A little girl standing on the dusty shoulder of the road, holding a piece of cardboard above her head. Even from a distance, he could read the desperate words scrawled in red marker, "Help." Derek slowed his motorcycle, his combat instincts immediately alert. He had seen traps before, in places far more dangerous than Tennessee, but something about the way the girl stood, her small body trembling, her face streaked with tears, told him this was no trick. He pulled over, the gravel crunching under his tires. As he removed his helmet, he got a better look at her. She was small, maybe 7 years old, with tangled brown hair and a pink dress covered in dirt. Her shoes were scuffed, and her knees were scraped as if she had fallen multiple times. "Hey there, sweetheart," Derek said, keeping his voice soft. He knew how he looked, tall, bearded, covered in tattoos and leather. He stayed on his bike, not wanting to scare her more than she already was. The girl's eyes were wild with panic. "Please, mister, please help. Grandma won't wake up. I tried and tried, but she won't wake up." Derek's blood ran cold. "Where is your grandma, honey?" The girl pointed toward a narrow dirt path that disappeared into the woods. "Down there. We were walking and she fell and she won't move, and I came to get help, but nobody stops. Nobody stops." Her voice broke into sobs, and Derek felt something crack inside his chest. How long had this child been standing here, begging strangers for help, while car after car drove past? He dismounted his motorcycle and knelt in front of her, bringing himself to her eye level. "What's your name?" "Emma. Emma Wright." "Okay, Emma, I'm Derek. I'm going to help you. Can you take me to your grandma?" Emma grabbed his hand with desperate strength and pulled him toward the path. "Hurry, please hurry!" As they moved through the trees, Derek called 911, giving them his location and explaining the situation. The dispatcher said an ambulance would be there in 15 minutes. 15 minutes felt like a lifetime. The path wound through thick underbrush for about 100 yards before opening into a small clearing. And there, lying on the ground beside an overturned basket of wild mushrooms, was an elderly woman. She was motionless, her skin pale, her lips slightly blue. Derek rushed to her side, pressing his fingers to her neck. There was a pulse, weak but present. He tilted her head back to check her airway, something he had done countless times in the field hospitals overseas. "Grandma!" Emma cried, falling to her knees beside the woman. She's alive, Emma. Your grandma is alive. But I need you to be brave for me, okay? The little girl nodded, tears streaming down her face. Derek noticed the medical alert bracelet on the woman's wrist. Diabetic. He looked at the scattered mushrooms and the small basket. They had been foraging, and something had gone wrong. A diabetic emergency, most likely. He pulled out his phone and called 911 again, updating them on the situation. Then he did something that surprised even himself. He took off his leather jacket, rolled it up, and placed it gently under the woman's head. "Is Grandma going to die?" Emma whispered. Derek looked at the terrified child and made a decision. He would not lie to her, but he would not steal her hope either. "I'm going to do everything I can to make sure she doesn't, but I need your help. Can you hold her hand and talk to her? Tell her about your favorite things. Sometimes people who are sleeping can still hear us." Emma nodded and took her grandmother's hand. "Grandma, it's me. Remember yesterday when we made cookies? You promised to teach me the secret recipe." As the child talked, Derek monitored the woman's vital signs, keeping her stable. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, he heard the distant sound of sirens growing closer. But as the ambulance arrived and the paramedics took over, Derek noticed something that made his stomach turn. The clearing was visible from the road, if you knew where to look. Someone had been here before him. There were fresh tire tracks on the dirt path. Someone had driven down here, seen the situation, and driven away without helping. Someone had left a dying woman and a desperate child alone in the woods. Derek looked at little Emma, who was clinging to a paramedic's hand, and a dark question formed in his mind. Who had been here before him, and why had they abandoned a child in need? The hospital waiting room smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. Derek sat in a plastic chair, still wearing his dusty riding boots, watching Emma sleep on a couch across from him. A kind nurse had given the child a blanket and a stuffed bear from the pediatric wing. 3 hours had passed since the ambulance rushed Margaret Wright, Emma's grandmother, to the emergency room. The doctors said she had suffered a severe hypoglycemic episode. If Derek had arrived even 10 minutes later, they would be planning a funeral instead of a recovery. He should have left. The paramedics had taken his statement, the police had his contact information, and his job here was done. But every time he looked at Emma, something kept him anchored to that uncomfortable chair. A woman burst through the emergency room doors, her heels clicking frantically on the linoleum floor. She was in her 30s, dressed in an expensive business suit, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite her obvious panic. "Emma, oh my God, Emma!" The little girl woke with a start and ran into the woman's arms. "Mommy!" Derek watched the reunion, feeling like an intruder. The woman, who he assumed was Margaret's daughter, covered Emma's face with kisses, while tears ruined her mascara. "I came as fast as I could. The hospital called my office. Baby, are you okay? Where's Grandma?" "And the doctors are helping her," Emma said. "But Mommy, she wouldn't wake up and I was so scared and nobody would stop, and then the motorcycle man helped us." The woman looked up, noticing Derek for the first time. Her expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, confusion, and something that looked uncomfortably like suspicion. Derek stood up slowly, keeping his hands visible. He knew what she was seeing: a large, intimidating man in a motorcycle club vest, covered in tattoos, sitting near her daughter. "You're the one who found them?" she asked, her tone guarded. "Yes, ma'am. I was riding by when I saw Emma on the side of the road." The woman studied him for a long moment, then something in her face softened. She walked toward him, still holding Emma's hand. "I'm Sarah Wright, thank you." The doctor said if she hadn't gotten help when she did. She could not finish the sentence. Derek nodded, understanding. "Your daughter is very brave," he said. "She didn't give up on getting help, even when people kept driving past." Sarah's expression darkened. "People drove past, while my daughter was asking for help." "Mommy, lots of cars didn't stop. I counted 23. I was standing there for so long and nobody would help until Derek came." The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. 23 vehicles had ignored a 7-year-old child begging for help. 23 people had seen a desperate little girl and decided she was not their problem. "I need to sit down," Sarah whispered. Derek guided her to a chair and Emma climbed onto her lap. For several minutes, no one spoke. The weight of what had happened settled over them like a heavy blanket. A doctor appeared through the double doors, and Sarah jumped to her feet. "How is my mother?" "Mrs. Wright is stable," the doctor said, offering a reassuring smile. "She's asking for Emma. She's very lucky. A few more minutes without intervention, and we would be having a very different conversation." Sarah let out a sob of relief. "Can we see her?" "Of course. But first I need to inform you that we've contacted the police. There's an investigation starting." "Investigation?" Sarah's voice sharpened. "What do you mean?" The doctor glanced at Derek, then back to Sarah. "We found evidence that someone else was present at the scene before the gentleman who helped. Someone who left without calling for assistance. In Tennessee, that can be considered criminal negligence, especially with a minor involved." Derek felt his jaw tighten. His suspicions were confirmed. Someone had seen Margaret collapse, seen little Emma panicking, and had driven away. But who? Sarah's face had gone pale. "Someone else was there?" "The police are reviewing traffic cameras and witness accounts. They'll be in touch." After the doctor left, Sarah turned to Derek with haunted eyes. "I don't understand. Who would do something like that? Who would leave a child and a dying woman in the woods?" Derek had no answer, but something told him this story was far from over. Emma tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, can Derek come see Grandma too? She'll want to thank him." Sarah hesitated, years of conditioning telling her to be wary of men who looked like Derek. But her daughter's innocent trust and the undeniable fact that this stranger had saved her family won the battle. Yes, of course he can." Margaret Wright was awake when they entered her room, though she looked fragile against the white hospital sheets. But her eyes lit up when she saw Emma, and she opened her arms for a hug. "My brave girl," she whispered. "The nurses told me what you did. Standing on that road asking for help, you saved my life. Derek helped too, Grandma. He found us, and he kept you breathing, and he stayed with me when I was scared." Margaret looked at Derek over her granddaughter's head. Her eyes were sharp despite her ordeal, taking in his appearance without judgment. "They told me you're part of a motorcycle club," she said. Derek nodded, bracing himself for the usual reaction. "Good," Margaret said firmly. "I've always believed that the measure of a person is what they do when no one is watching. You stopped when no one else would. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Before Derek could respond, a nurse entered with a detective. The investigation was about to begin. Detective Rachel Torres was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had been with the Maplewood Police Department for 15 years, and she had seen plenty of cases that challenged her faith in humanity. This one was already climbing that list. "Mr. Callahan, I need to go over the timeline with you again," she said, sitting across from Derek in a small consultation room near the nurse's station. "Call me Derek, and sure, whatever helps. You said you were returning from Nashville when you saw Emma on the highway. What time was that?" "Around 3:40 in the afternoon. I remember because I checked my phone right before I saw her. And how long would you estimate she had been standing there?" Derek thought about the child's sunburned cheeks, her hoarse voice, her desperate exhaustion. "Based on her condition, I'd guess at least 45 minutes, maybe longer." Detective Torres wrote something in her notebook. "We've obtained footage from a traffic camera half a mile up the road. We've identified 23 vehicles that passed the location during that time window. We're tracking down each driver." "Any leads on who else was at the scene?" The detective's expression tightened. "There were tire tracks leading to the clearing, a distinct pattern from an SUV. We're working on matching them." A knock on the door interrupted them. A young officer entered, looking troubled. "Detective, you need to see this. We've identified the SUV." Torres stood up quickly. "Stay here, Mr. Callahan. I may have more questions." Derek waited, his mind racing. Something about this situation felt wrong, beyond the obvious cruelty of abandoning a child. There was a piece of this puzzle he was not seeing yet. 20 minutes later, the detective returned. Her face was carefully blank, but Derek had learned to read people in situations where misreading could get you killed. She was angry, very angry. "Mr. Callahan, I need to inform you that you're no longer a person of interest in this case. In fact, we may need you as a witness." "Witness to what?" Torres sat down heavily. "The SUV belonged to Richard Hartley. He's a town councilman here in Maplewood. He's also Sarah Wright's brother-in-law." Derek felt the blood drain from his face. "Family? Her own family was there and didn't help?" "It appears so. We're bringing him in for questioning. But there's more." The detective pulled out a photograph. It showed a handsome man in his 50s, smiling in what looked like a campaign photo. "Richard Hartley has been very vocal about wanting motorcycle clubs banned from Maplewood. He's proposed ordinances, organized community meetings, written letters to the editor. He calls groups like your Hell Angels a public safety threat." The irony was so bitter, Derek could taste it. The man who called bikers dangerous had abandoned his own niece and mother-in-law to die in the woods. "There's something else," Torres continued. "Margaret Wright has been refusing to change her will. Richard has been pressuring her for months to leave her property to him instead of to Sarah and Emma. That property is worth over $2 million. It's the last large undeveloped plot in the county." Derek leaned back in his chair, processing this information. "You think he saw an opportunity and took it?" "I think it's suspicious that a man who stood to inherit millions if Margaret Wright died just happened to find her in a medical emergency and chose not to help." "Can you prove that?" "That's where you come in. Emma mentioned something to her mother. She said she saw a white car come down the path while she was with her grandmother. She tried to wave them down, but they backed up and drove away. She didn't see the driver, but she remembered something else." Derek waited. "She said the car had a yellow sticker on the back window, a smiley face. Richard Hartley's SUV has a smiley face sticker. His daughter put it there last year." The evidence was circumstantial, but it painted a damning picture. A town councilman who preached about public safety had potentially committed the ultimate act of negligence against his own family, and the only person who had stepped up to help was exactly the kind of person Hartley had spent years vilifying. Derek stood up. "What do you need from me?" "Right now, just your statement and your patience. This case is going to get complicated. Richard Hartley has powerful friends in this town. There will be people who won't want to believe he could do something like this." "And what about Emma? That little girl stood on the road for nearly an hour, begging for help. She watched her grandmother almost die. She deserves justice." Detective Torres met his eyes. "That's exactly why I'm going to make sure this case is airtight, no matter whose toes I step on." As Derek walked back toward Margaret's room, he passed by a window overlooking the parking lot. A news van had already arrived. The story was spreading, and Maplewood was about to face some uncomfortable truths. His phone buzzed with a text from his club president. "Saw the news. Brothers are proud. Need backup?" Derek typed back, "Not yet, but stand by. This isn't over." He had no idea how right he was, because at that very moment, Richard Hartley was making a phone call to someone who could make problems disappear, and Derek Callahan had just become a very big problem. The news spread through Maplewood like wildfire. By the next morning, every coffee shop, barbershop, and church pew buzzed with the same story. A little girl had stood on Highway 12 for nearly an hour begging for help, and 23 people had driven past without stopping. But it was the identity of the 24th driver that truly shocked the town to its core. Richard Hartley held a press conference outside his home, his wife standing beside him with a frozen smile. He wore a crisp blue suit and spoke with the practiced ease of a seasoned politician. "I want to address these false accusations directly," he said, cameras flashing. "I was nowhere near that road yesterday. This is a coordinated attack by criminal elements who want to destroy my reputation because I've fought to keep our town safe from dangerous outsiders." Derek watched the broadcast from Margaret's hospital room, his jaw tight. Emma sat on her grandmother's bed, coloring in a book a nurse had brought her. The child seemed unaware of the storm brewing around her testimony. "He's lying," Sarah said quietly, standing beside Derek. "Emma doesn't lie. She's 7 years old. She saw that car clearly." "I know," Derek replied, "but he's got money and connections. This won't be easy." Detective Torres called an hour later. "We have a problem. Hartley's lawyer is claiming the smiley face sticker is circumstantial, says dozens of cars in town have similar stickers. He's also filing a motion to suppress Emma's testimony, claiming she's too young to be a reliable witness." Derek gripped the phone harder. "She's the only one who saw him there." "I know, but there's something else." 3 of the 23 drivers who passed Emma have come forward voluntarily. They're willing to testify that they saw a white SUV parked on the dirt path when they drove by. One of them took a photo because she thought someone had broken down. Hope flickered in Derek's chest. A photo? It's not clear enough to read the plates, but it shows the vehicle model. It's consistent with Hartley's SUV. And Derek, there's more. We pulled his phone records. He received a call at 3:15 that afternoon from Margaret Wright's landline. The call lasted 40 seconds. Derek processed this information slowly. Margaret called him before she collapsed? It appears so. We think she felt unwell during the walk and called the first family member she could reach. If Hartley knew she was in trouble and still drove away, that's not just negligence. That's something much worse. Sarah overheard enough of the conversation to understand. Her face had gone white. He knew. Richard knew my mother was in danger, and he just left her there to die. Margaret, who had been resting with her eyes closed, spoke up weakly. "I remember now. I called him. I felt dizzy on the trail. And I called Richard because his office is closest. He said he was coming. He said he would be right there." The room fell silent. A man had promised to help his dying mother-in-law, then driven to the scene, seen her unconscious body and her terrified granddaughter, and chosen to leave them both to fate. "Why?" Sarah whispered. "Why would he do this to us?" Derek thought about the $2 million property. He thought about the will that Margaret refused to change. He thought about how convenient it would have been for Richard if Margaret had simply never woken up. Some monsters wore leather and rode motorcycles. Others wore suits and sat on town councils. Derek knew which kind was truly dangerous. The trial began 3 weeks later, and Maplewood had never seen anything like it in its entire history. The courthouse steps were lined with protesters on both sides. Half carried signs supporting Richard Hartley, calling him a victim of biker gang intimidation. The other half held photos of Emma and signs that read 23 cars. 1 hero, 0 excuses. Derek arrived on his motorcycle, flanked by 6 members of the Hell Angels. They wore their colors proudly, but their behavior was impeccable. No aggression, no confrontation, just silent, dignified presence. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. The photo from the passing driver, the phone records showing Margaret's desperate call, the testimony of 3 witnesses who saw the white SUV, and finally, Emma herself. She sat in the witness chair, looking impossibly small, clutching the stuffed bear from the hospital. The defense attorney approached her with a practiced, gentle smile. "Emma, sweetie, you were very scared that day, weren't you?" "Yes, sir. And when we're scared, sometimes we see things that aren't really there, don't we?" Emma's brow furrowed with determination. "I saw what I saw. A white car with a smiley face came down the path. I waved and waved. Then it drove away backward. But you didn't see the driver, did you?" "No, sir, but I saw the sticker. It was yellow and happy. I remember because it made me sadder. A happy sticker on a car that wouldn't help me." The defense attorney had no response to that. The jury members shifted in their seats, several wiping their eyes. Then came the moment no one expected. Richard Hartley's own daughter took the stand. 16-year-old Madison Hartley had requested to testify for the prosecution. Her father's legal team had fought it fiercely, but she was determined. "I put that sticker on Dad's car," Madison said, her voice steady despite her tears. "It was a joke between us. I never thought." She paused, composing herself. That afternoon I was home when Dad came back. He was upset, pacing around. I asked what was wrong. He said nothing. But later, I heard him on the phone. He said, "It's handled. She won't make it. By the time anyone finds her, it'll be too late." Gasps erupted through the courtroom. Richard Hartley lunged to his feet, shouting that his daughter was lying, that she had been manipulated by enemies. Bailiffs restrained him as the judge called for order. Derek sat in the gallery, watching the man's mask finally crack. This was not just negligence anymore. This was calculated attempted murder. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Criminal negligence resulting in endangerment. Attempted murder by omission. Child abandonment. Richard Hartley was led away in handcuffs, his political career and freedom destroyed by his own choices. But for Derek, the verdict was not the end. It was a beginning. 6 months later, the leaves had returned to the trees along Highway 12. A small memorial stood at the spot where Emma had held her cardboard sign, placed there by the community that had learned a painful lesson about judgment and indifference. Derek pulled his motorcycle to the shoulder and removed his helmet. He came here sometimes when he needed to think, the place where everything had changed forever. A car pulled up behind him. Sarah Wright stepped out, followed by Emma, who ran toward Derek with open arms. "Derek, Derek, guess what? Grandma made her secret cookie recipe, and she said I can give you some." He knelt down and accepted the small bag of cookies Emma thrust into his hands. "Thank you, sweetheart. These smell amazing." Sarah approached with a warm smile. In the months since the trial, they had become close friends. Margaret had insisted on it, claiming that anyone who saved her life automatically became family. "Mom wanted me to invite you to Sunday dinner," Sarah said. "She won't take no for an answer. She's making her famous pot roast." Derek smiled, something that came easier these days. "Tell her I'll be there." Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Derek, can I ask you something?" "Anything, kiddo." "Why did you stop? All those other cars didn't stop. Why did you?" Derek considered the question carefully. He thought about Afghanistan and the children he couldn't save there. He thought about his own son, growing up in California without him. He thought about all the years he had spent believing he was beyond redemption. "Because a long time ago, someone didn't stop for me when I needed help," he said finally, "and I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to be different, I would take it. You gave me that chance, Emma. You helped me more than you know." The little girl hugged him tightly. "You're my hero." "No," Derek said softly. "You're the hero. You didn't give up. You kept asking for help even when everyone passed you by. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen." Later that evening, Derek sat on Margaret's porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. The old woman sat beside him in her rocking chair, a blanket over her knees. "I've changed my will," she said quietly. "I'm leaving a part of my land to your motorcycle club, for a community center, a place where people can come for help, no matter who they are or what they look like." Derek turned to her, stunned. "Margaret, I can't accept that. You can and you will. This town judged you and your brothers as threats, while welcoming the real monster to Sunday dinners. It's time things changed, and you're going to help me change them." The Hell Angels Community Center opened the following spring. It became a place where veterans found support, where struggling families found resources, and where children learned that heroes don't always look the way you expect. Emma cut the ribbon at the opening ceremony. She was 8 now, confident and bright, with a smile that could light up any room. She still carried a small scar on her knee. From that day she ran for help. She called it her brave mark. Derek stood among his brothers, watching the community gather. People who once crossed the street to avoid him now shook his hand and thanked him. It wasn't the recognition that mattered. It was the proof that one moment of courage could break down walls that had stood for years. 23 cars had passed a desperate child without stopping, but it only took one man on a motorcycle to remind a whole town what humanity looked like. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. As Derek rode home that night, wind in his face and stars above, he thought about the journey that brought him here. A year ago, he was a broken veteran with nothing to live for. Now he had purpose, community, and something unexpected: hope. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Emma wants to know if you'll teach her to ride when she's older." Derek laughed, surprising even himself. Years since he laughed like that. He typed back, "Tell her it's a deal, but she has to finish school first." The road stretched before him, dark and endless, but for the first time in years, Derek was not afraid of where it might lead. He had learned the most important lesson. Sometimes the people the world fears most are exactly the ones who will save you. And sometimes a cardboard sign and a brave girl can change a man's life.